What is the conspiracy of the Prince of Persia? And what does an ancient prophecy from the prophet Daniel reveal about the spiritual war shaping the conflict between Iran and Israel today? To understand the battle raging in the unseen realm, we must first look to a man who chose to pierce the veil. His name was Daniel. Not the prophet of old, but a man forged in the crucible of the modern world, a man who bore his name like a quiet inheritance. His world was not one of ancient Babylon, of bronze gates and chariots, but of glass towers and fiber-optic cables. From his minimalist apartment overlooking the sprawling, indifferent lights of London, Daniel served as a senior strategic analyst for a private geopolitical intelligence firm. His days were a relentless torrent of data, satellite imagery of the Strait of Hormuz, encrypted communications intercepted from Tehran, financial forensics tracking dark money, and predictive algorithms that attempted to chart the course of human conflict. He was one of the best. He understood the logic of war, the cold calculus of power. He could explain the animosity between Iran and Israel in 100 different ways. Through the lens of post-1979 revolutionary ideology, the strategic necessity of regional hegemony, the race for nuclear armament, or the complex web of proxy militias. His reports were sober, respected, and quoted by governments. Yet for weeks, a profound disquiet had taken root in his soul, a dissonance that his data could not explain. The catalyst had been the Vienna summit. It had been billed as the last, best hope for de-escalation. Instead, it had collapsed into a spectacle of acrimony. Daniel had watched the live feeds, his professional calm cracking with every venomous exchange. He saw the faces of the diplomats, the Iranian foreign minister, his features a mask of righteous fury, the Israeli envoy, his jaw set like stone, his eyes burning with defiance. The world saw a political failure. Daniel saw something else. He saw a hatred that was too old, too primal, to be merely political. It was an ancient, elemental rage wearing the masks of modern men. That night, sleep offered no refuge. The data streams replayed in his mind, but they were warped, twisted. The lines of code on his screen seemed to writhe like serpents. The satellite photos of military installations began to look like malignant growths on the face of the earth. He felt a spiritual sickness, a deep and aching grief for his people, the people of Israel, whose existence seemed to hang by a thread woven of threats and fury, and for the world, teetering on a precipice. His algorithms had failed. His logic was a fortress built on sand. There was another variable, an unseen force multiplier that was not accounted for in any of his models. A whisper from his heritage, from the scriptures he had studied since childhood, returned to him not as a comfort, but as a challenge. This kind of battle is not won with intelligence reports or economic sanctions. In the sterile quiet of his apartment, surrounded by the technology that was supposed to give him clarity, Daniel made a decision. He would shut it all down. He logged out of the secure network. He powered down his monitors until his reflection was the only thing left on the black glass. He pushed aside the dossiers and the praise from his superiors. He would embark on a different kind of analysis. He began a fast. For 21 days he would abstain from the rich foods and pleasantries of his life. No fine wine, no savory meals, only the simplest sustenance to keep his body alive. His purpose was singular and desperate, to quiet the noise of the world so he could hear the voice of God. He knelt, not as an analyst seeking data, but as a desperate man seeking wisdom, seeking understanding for the fate of his people. The first week was a physical agony. His body, accustomed to comfort, screamed in protest. His mind was a chaotic storm of cravings, doubts, and the incessant pull of his work. He felt foolish, a modern man playing at ancient rituals while the real world burned. By the second week, a change began. The physical hunger subsided into a dull ache, but his senses sharpened. He could feel the spiritual atmosphere of the city like a pressure on his skin. As he prayed, focusing his entire being on Jerusalem's peace and Israel's protection, he began to encounter a strange resistance. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a presence. It was a suffocating spiritual static, a heavy, oppressive blanket that seemed to absorb his prayers before they could ascend. It felt ancient, intelligent, and deeply malevolent. It was a wall of silence, a spiritual void that seemed to mock his efforts. The name for it rose unbidden in his mind: Stronghold. He intensified his prayers, his grief turning into a warrior's cry in the silence of his room. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he would whisper, his voice raw, let me understand. Pierce this darkness. Do not remain silent while your people stand at the brink. The resistance grew stronger. He felt an immense weight of despair trying to crush his spirit, whispering insidious lies. God has forgotten you. Your people are doomed. This struggle is pointless. There is no one listening. It was a battle of attrition, fought not on a field of dirt and blood, but in the depths of his own soul. On the evening of the 21st day, Daniel was spent. He was physically wasted, his frame thin and gaunt. He felt a profound emptiness, a crushing sense of failure. The static was thicker than ever, the silence more absolute. Had it all been for nothing? He lay prostrate on the floor, his forehead pressed against the cool wood, his strength gone. He had no more words, no more arguments, only a single silent tear that traced a path through the dust on the floor. It was the tear of complete surrender. And in that moment of utter brokenness, everything changed. It did not begin with a sound, but with a shift in the very substance of the air. The oppressive spiritual static did not just vanish, it was violently torn apart. A light, more brilliant than the sun, yet gentle on the eyes, began to bloom in the center of the room. It was not a light that cast shadows, but one that consumed them. An energy, pure and terrifyingly holy, pulsed through the apartment, making the very atoms of the building hum. Daniel, lifting his weary head, felt a terror that was not of fear, but of absolute, unadulterated awe. He was no longer alone. Someone had answered. The being stood in the epicenter of the light, a figure of impossible majesty. He was clothed in what looked like the finest linen, woven from starlight itself, and around his waist was a belt of purest gold that pulsed with a soft, internal fire. His form was sculpted and powerful, like beryl stone, translucent and yet utterly solid. But it was his face that shattered Daniel's last vestiges of composure. It was like a contained bolt of lightning, a living storm of holy energy, and his eyes were like flaming torches, seeing not just the man kneeling before him, but seeing through him, through time, through the very fabric of his soul. His arms and legs shimmered with the incandescent glow of polished bronze, and when he finally spoke, his voice was not a single sound but a symphony of power, like the roar of a vast advancing multitude. All strength fled from Daniel's body. The analytical mind that could hold 1,000 data points at once was wiped clean, overwhelmed by a power so absolute it defied comprehension. His face drained of color, he collapsed to the floor, a trembling, insignificant heap of humanity in the presence of the divine. He was undone, his mortal frame incapable of processing the sheer glory before him. He was not just afraid, he was dissolved. Then a hand touched him. It was a touch that felt both impossibly strong and infinitely gentle. A current of life, warm and steadying, flowed into him, chasing away the terror and the deathly chill. It was the messenger's hand. Daniel felt himself being lifted, set back upon his trembling hands and knees. "Do not be afraid, Daniel." The voice of the multitude resonated, yet it focused into a single clear thought directly in his mind, a voice that was both thunder and whisper. "You who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you." The words were an anchor in the storm. Highly esteemed, the validation washed over him, healing the wounds of his 21 days of perceived failure. With strength that was not his own, Daniel pushed himself to his feet, swaying, his eyes still wide with awe but no longer paralyzed by fear. He stood before the celestial being, ready to receive the message he had so desperately sought. "Daniel," the angel began, his gaze piercing and kind, "from the very first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard. and I have come in response to your words." A wave of relief and confusion washed over Daniel. "The first day," he managed to stammer, his voice a dry rasp. "But it has been 3 weeks. I felt nothing, only silence, a resistance." The messenger's expression became grave, the light in his eyes intensifying. "Your feeling was correct. I was dispatched the moment your prayer began its ascent. But I was intercepted. I was opposed. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me for 21 days. The words hung in the air, electric and terrifying. The prince of Persia. Daniel's mind, trained in geopolitics, immediately pictured the supreme leader in Tehran, the powerful commanders of the Revolutionary Guard. But he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the angel was not speaking of a man of flesh and blood. No human could withstand such a being for a moment, let alone 3 weeks. "He is no mortal king," the angel confirmed, sensing Daniel's thoughts. "He is a shadow sovereign, a dark regent assigned to that region of the earth. He is the spiritual authority that hovers over the nation you call Iran. His entire purpose is to pervert its destiny, to fuel its hatred, to twist its ambitions into a weapon against the people of God. He is the architect of the spiritual darkness that you felt as a wall of static. He fought to keep me from reaching you, to ensure that this message of future events concerning your people would remain unspoken, that you would be left in despair, believing God had abandoned you." The angel described the battle, and as he spoke, Daniel could almost see it. It was not a clash of steel, but a war of wills, of light, against a suffocating, intelligent darkness. He envisioned the angel, a being of pure light, pressing forward through a spiritual territory thick with malice and deception, while the Prince of Persia, a vast and ancient entity of pride and shadow, threw up barriers of despair, confusion, and spiritual interference. Every prayer Daniel had uttered for 21 days had been a volley of ammunition, fueling the angel's advance. His fast had been the act of sharpening the spear. He had been a participant in a war he never knew he was fighting. The resistance was immense, the angel continued, his voice resonating with the memory of the conflict. "The stronghold over that kingdom is ancient and deeply entrenched. I was held in contention, locked in a battle of dominion, until help arrived." "Help?" Daniel whispered. "Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me," the angel declared, and at the mention of the name, the very air in the room seemed to grow charged with a new kind of power, fierce, militant, and utterly loyal. "Michael is the great prince who stands guard over your people, Daniel. He is the designated protector of the sons of Israel. When the battle reached a stalemate, he intervened. His arrival was like a blade of pure light, breaking the deadlock and allowing me to pass through while he remained there, holding the line against the kings of Persia." The revelation was staggering. Not only was there a dark prince over Persia, but there was a great prince of heaven, an archangel, specifically tasked with protecting Israel. The conflict was not just a random struggle. It was a targeted war between specific, named entities over the destiny of a nation. The angel's form seemed to shimmer, as if preparing for his return journey. "Know this," he said, his voice now filled with an urgent gravity. "I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. But once I leave you, I must return to fight against the Prince of Persia, and when I have gone forth, behold, the Prince of Greece will come." It was a final, devastating piece of the puzzle. This was not a single, isolated war. It was a system. As earthly empires rose and fell, Persia, then Greece, and by implication every empire to follow a corresponding spiritual power would rise with it, each one hostile to the purposes of God. The battle was relentless, eternal, and Daniel was standing at its very epicenter. He felt his strength failing again, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the revelation. The messenger reached out a second time, steadying him, preparing him for the detailed, earth-shattering prophecy he had fought so hard to deliver. The real message was about to begin. The celestial messenger steadied Daniel, his touch a conduit of supernatural strength. The overwhelming awe began to recede, replaced by a focused, razor-sharp clarity. The noise of the world, the city outside his window, had ceased to exist. There was only this room, this holy presence, and the impending weight of a truth that would reframe all of human history. The conflict you see on your screens, Daniel, the animosity between the land of Persia and the children of Israel, is not a new phenomenon, the angel began, his voice a tapestry of sorrow and divine authority. It is the earthly manifestation of a spiritual enmity that predates nations and empires. The Prince of Persia is merely the current custodian of this ancient hatred. To understand the why behind the headlines and the war cries, you must understand the origin of the feud. The angel's words became a vision. The minimalist apartment dissolved, and Daniel found himself standing on an ethereal plane, looking down through the mists of time. He saw the genesis of the conflict, not in political treaties or border disputes, but in the realm of covenants and promises. He saw Abraham, a lone figure in a vast, empty land, receiving a promise from God himself, a promise of a people, a land, and a destiny through which all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Behold the seed of it all, the angel's voice echoed through the vision. A divine covenant, a promise that set apart a people for a divine purpose. From that moment, every force in opposition to the Creator had a target. To destroy the people of the promise was to attempt to make God a liar. To eradicate them was to sever the lineage through which the ultimate redemption would come. The vision swirled and shifted. Daniel saw Egypt, a mighty empire under the thrall of its own dark gods, its pharaoh, a vessel of pride, seeking to crush the nascent nation of Israel in its infancy. He felt the lash of the whip, the sting of sand, and the suffocating despair of slavery. Yet he also saw the mighty hand of God, the plagues that shattered Egypt's pantheon, and the parting of the Red Sea, victory not just over an army, but over the spiritual powers that held that army in their sway. The timeline accelerated. The angel showed him Haman the Agagite, a high official in the ancient Persian court, a man consumed by a genocidal rage against the Jews. Daniel had read the story of Esther countless times, but now he saw it with new eyes. He saw past Haman's political ambition and personal pride. He saw the dark, serpentine influence whispering in Haman's ear, the same ancient hatred now working through a willing human vessel within the very heart of the Persian Empire. It was the Prince of Persia's first major gambit on the world stage, a meticulous plan to annihilate the Jewish people in a single day. "Do you see?" the angel pressed. Haman was the glove, but the Prince of Persia was the hand within it. His goal was the same then as it is now, to sever the covenant line, to stop the story. But he was thwarted. How? Not by an army, but by the fasting and prayer of a single queen and the courage of her people. The spiritual battle was won in humility and desperation, which in turn unlocked the earthly victory. The vision dissolved, and Daniel was back in his apartment, the angel's light filling the space. The historical dots connected in his mind with devastating clarity. The spirit that had animated Haman was the same spirit that now animated the rhetoric coming from Tehran. The political language had changed from imperial decrees to revolutionary slogans, but the underlying spiritual intent remained identical. The Prince of Persia's strategy is twofold, the angel explained, his voice taking on the tone of a divine intelligence briefing. First, he seeks to isolate your people. He whispers into the ears of world leaders, media influencers, and academics, casting Israel as a pariah, an aggressor, an illegitimate state. He magnifies every flaw, fabricates lies, and fosters a global narrative of condemnation. He seeks to cut Israel off from its allies, leaving it alone and vulnerable. Daniel thought of the United Nations resolutions, the campus protests, the biased news reports he analyzed daily. It wasn't just poor journalism or political maneuvering, it was a coordinated spiritual campaign of isolation. Second, and more directly, the angel continued, his eyes like burning coals. He seeks to empower a physical threat to carry out the act of destruction. He has chosen the modern nation of Iran as his primary instrument. He has woven himself into the fabric of its leadership, binding radical theology with national ambition. He presents the destruction of Israel not as a political goal, but as a holy calling, a divine mandate. He promises them glory, regional dominance, and the fulfillment of eschatological prophecies, all in exchange for their service as the executioner of his ancient grudge. Suddenly, the seemingly irrational actions of the Iranian regime made a terrible kind of sense. The funding of proxy armies like Hezbollah and Hamas, the relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons despite crippling sanctions, the fiery, apocalyptic speech as it wasn't just geopolitics. It was religious zealotry weaponized by a dark spiritual power. The regime's leaders believed they were serving God, but they were in fact unwitting pawns in the conspiracy of the Prince of Persia. "This is the war behind the war, Daniel," the angel concluded, his voice soft but heavy. "It is a war for the narrative, a war for the soul of a nation, and a war for the very survival of the people of the promise. The vision I am about to give you will detail the earthly clashes to come, the movements of armies and the fall of kings. But never forget what you have seen tonight. Never forget that every tank that moves, every missile that flies, is driven by this ancient, unseen hatred. You cannot analyze the conflict without accounting for this prince." Daniel stood, speechless, the weight of 2 millennia of spiritual warfare settling upon his shoulders. He was no longer just an analyst. He was a watchman on the wall, shown the true nature of the enemy. The question was no longer if a war would come, but how its spiritual dimension would be fought. The angelic messenger raised a hand, and the very air in the room seemed to crystallize into a living map. It was a three-dimensional topographical display of the Middle East, shimmering with ethereal light. But this was no ordinary map from Daniel's intelligence agency. Cities glowed with varying intensity, and faint crimson lines pulsed like veins between them, connecting Tehran to Beirut, Damascus, and the Gaza Strip. To understand the coming conflict, you must understand the prince's earthly strategy, the angel declared, his voice guiding Daniel's gaze across the luminous map. The Prince of Persia is a master of asymmetric warfare, both in the spiritual and physical realms. He rarely confronts his primary target directly. Instead, he cultivates chaos on its borders. He raises up proxies, saturating them with his own venomous ideology and providing them with the means for destruction. He creates a ring of fire, a circle of vipers to harass, bleed, and demoralize your people. As the angel spoke, one of the crimson lines on the map flared with a malevolent, sickly green light. It originated in Tehran and snaked through Iraq and Syria, terminating in the south of Lebanon. The name Hezbollah materialized in Daniel's mind, not as a word, but as a conceptor fusion of religious fanaticism, military precision, and suicidal devotion. The vision shifted. Daniel was no longer in his apartment. He was soaring over the lush valleys of southern Lebanon, but the beauty was a deception. He could see with supernatural clarity beneath the tranquil villages and green hills. He saw a hidden world, a subterranean network of tunnels and bunkers, more extensive and sophisticated than any CIA report had ever detailed. He saw vast arsenals of rockets and precision-guided missiles, not counted in the thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands, each one pointed like a dagger at the heart of Israel. He could feel the spiritual atmosphere of the region. It was thick and cloying, a palpable sense of martyrdom and bloodlust, nurtured and funded by the Prince of Persia's earthly regime. He saw the fighters, their eyes burning with a zealous fire, their lives pledged not to the well-being of Lebanon, but to the singular goal of Israel's annihilation. They were a perfect instrument, a non-state actor that could wage a state-level war, allowing the master in Tehran to deny culpability. "This is his northern claw," the angel's voice explained, echoing through the vision. "A proxy army more powerful than most national militaries, embedded within a civilian population to maximize bloodshed and international condemnation when Israel is forced to respond. Every rocket launched is a prayer to the prince's ambition." Then, the map's focus shifted south. Another crimson line pulsed, this one terminating in the dense, chaotic urban sprawl of the Gaza Strip. The names Hamas and Islamic Jihad appeared, glowing with a cruder, more chaotic energy than the northern proxy. The vision plunged Daniel into the labyrinthine streets of Gaza City. The air was heavy with a different kind of despairone born of poverty, indoctrination, and generations of rage. He saw children being taught to hate before they could read, their schoolbooks filled with caricatures of his people. He saw factories not for commerce, but for the crude manufacturing of rockets from scavenged pipes. He felt the suffocating grip of a leadership that used its own people as human shields, that celebrated death and diverted humanitarian aid to construct tunnels of terror. "This is his southern claw," the angel's voice continued, a note of profound sadness in its tone, less sophisticated but more reckless. A perpetual thorn in the side, designed to provoke, to drain resources, and to keep the southern front in a constant state of turmoil. The Prince of Persia delights in this proxy, for it allows him to turn the suffering of the Palestinian people, suffering he helps to perpetuate, into a weapon against Israel. The luminous map expanded, revealing the broader strategy. He saw the prince's influence stirring instability in Syria, attempting to build a continuous land bridge of control from Tehran to the Mediterranean. He saw tendrils of influence reaching into Yemen with the Houthis, a way to threaten vital shipping lanes and open another front. It was a grand, suffocating strategy of encirclement, a geopolitical anaconda squeeze, orchestrated from the unseen realm. The vision pulled back, returning Daniel to his apartment. The glowing map faded, but the chilling blueprint was seared into his mind. He finally understood. The constant, low-grade conflicts, the periodic eruptions of violence from Gaza, the ever-present threat from Lebanon, they were not separate, isolated events. They were all part of a single, coordinated campaign, conducted by a single malevolent intelligence. The Prince of Persia was playing a grand game of chess, and these proxy groups were his pawns, knights, and rooks, moved into position for a final, decisive checkmate. "The world's analysts see disparate terror groups," the angel said, his fiery eyes locking onto Daniel's. "They see political grievances and cycles of violence. You must see the truth. They are the limbs of a single beast. They are the instruments of a spiritual war, funded, armed, and spiritually empowered by the Prince of Persia. The coming vision will show you a time when the master decides the time for proxies is over, when he will risk his own hand to strike the final blow. But first, he will use these instruments to create an unprecedented level of chaos, designed to weaken Israel's resolve and blind the world to his true intentions." Daniel's heart pounded. He had spent his career trying to predict the what and the when. Now he understood the who and the why. The next major escalation, he realized with dawning horror, wouldn't just be another round of fighting. It would be an overture, a carefully orchestrated piece of a much larger, more terrifying symphony of destruction. The angelic messenger fell silent, allowing the weight of the prophetic blueprint to settle upon Daniel. The understanding was a physical burden, a cold stone in the pit of his stomach. He now saw the world not as a complex system of human interests, but as a battlefield, with every news report and political maneuver potentially a move in this cosmic game. "The prince is a strategist of immense subtlety," the angel resumed, his voice drawing Daniel back from the brink of despair. "His ultimate goal is annihilation, but he knows a direct, unprovoked assault would galvanize the world against him. Therefore, his next phase is not one of open war, but of masterful deception. He will orchestrate a crisis so shocking, so brutal, that Israel's response will be viewed not as self-defense, but as a disproportionate, world-enraging aggression. He will bait the trap." The light in the room dimmed, and the vision returned, but this time it was terrifyingly specific. Daniel felt as if he were watching a high-definition, real-time intelligence feed from the future. He saw the Southern Claw, the proxy in Gaza, being prepared. It was not the usual low-level activity. He saw months of meticulous planning, a level of operational security and coordination that was chillingly professional. He saw the Prince of Persia's influence, a dark spiritual energy, flowing down the crimson line on the unseen map, empowering the proxy leaders, blinding Israeli intelligence, and weaving a blanket of complacency over the southern border. He saw a specific date on a calendar, a Jewish holiday, a day of celebration and religious observance. The Prince of Persia, in his ancient malice, had chosen a holy day for the desecration. The vision accelerated into a horrifying crescendo. Daniel witnessed the attack unfold. It was not another barrage of crude rockets. It was a multi-pronged, sophisticated invasion. He saw paramilitary units, their eyes burning with the zealous fire he had seen before, breaching the high-tech border fence as if it were paper. He saw them pour into peaceful kibbutzim, quiet towns, and a music festival where young people were dancing in the dawn light. The scene fractured into 100 points of horror. The angel did not spare him the details. Daniel saw not a battle but a massacre. He witnessed unspeakable acts of cruelty, the slaughter of families in their homes, the torture of innocents, the abduction of men, women, children, and the elderly, dragged back into the dark tunnels of Gaza as trophies. The air was filled with the screams of the dying and the triumphant shouts of the attackers, their cries of Allahu Akbar twisted from a declaration of God's greatness into a barbaric war cry. Daniel cried out, a raw, guttural sound of anguish, and fell to his knees. The analyst in him was gone, replaced by a Jew weeping for his people. He felt the shock, the grief, the bottomless rage that would soon engulf the nation of Israel. This was not war, it was a pogrom. It was Haman's spirit given modern weapons. Behold the symphony of deception. The angel's voice cut through the horror, stern and unwavering. Every horrific act you witness is intentional. It is designed to provoke an overwhelming response. It is calculated to sear the soul of your nation and force its hand. The Prince of Persia knows that the government of Israel will have no choice but to retaliate with overwhelming force to rescue the hostages and dismantle the threat. The vision shifted. Now Daniel saw the aftermath. He saw Israeli tanks rolling into Gaza, fighter jets leveling buildings that housed command centers and rocket launchers. He saw the inevitable tragic cost of urban warfare, the collateral damage, the civilian casualties, the images of destruction that would flood the world's screens. And then he saw the second phase of the Prince of Persia's plan unfold. He watched as a global narrative, meticulously prepared, was activated. He saw the media focus shift almost instantly from the initial massacre to the Israeli response. The world's memory, short and fickle, would be manipulated. The attackers would be reframed as militants or freedom fighters, while the Israeli defense forces would be universally condemned as a brutal occupying army. He saw protests erupting in cities across the globe, in London, Paris, New York, and across the Arab world. He saw university campuses become hotbeds of anti-Semitic rhetoric disguised as political activism. He heard the carefully crafted lies whispered by the prince's spiritual influence that Israel was committing genocide, that it was deliberately targeting civilians. The initial spark, the horrific massacre that started the fire, would be all but forgotten, buried under an avalanche of condemnation directed at its victims. The trap is sprung. The angel's voice resonated with grim finality. The southern claw has served its purpose. It has drawn Israel into a bloody, protracted war that isolates it on the world stage. Its moral standing is shattered. Its allies are pressured to abandon it. The world's attention is fixated on the plight of Gaza, exactly as the prince intended. And while the world is distracted watching the south burn, the real danger prepares to strike from the north. The vision faded, leaving Daniel trembling on the floor of his apartment, the phantom screams still echoing in his ears. He was drenched in a cold sweat. He now understood the terrifying genius of the enemy. It was a plan designed to turn Israel's greatest strength, its resolve to defend its people, into its greatest vulnerability on the world stage. He looked at the angel, his eyes pleading. Why? Why would you show me such horror? Because you must know the nature of the deception to pray against it, the angel replied, his form solidifying once more in the quiet room. You and those who have ears to hear must not be swayed by the coming narrative. You must remember the spark that started the fire. You must pray for wisdom for your leaders, for protection for your soldiers, and for the scales to fall from the eyes of a deceived world. For this is only the overture. The main performance, the one the Prince of Persia believes will be his final victory, is still being prepared. Daniel struggled to his feet, his body aching as if he had physically endured the visions. The horror of the southern massacre had been seared into his soul, but the angel's final warning chilled him even more deeply. The main performance is still being prepared. While the world is mesmerized by the fire in the south, the angel declared, his voice cutting through Daniel's turmoil, look to the north. For the Prince of Persia uses deception as a smokescreen for mobilization. The southern claw was the sacrificial pawn to draw the king into a fatal position. The northern claw is the queen, poised for the checkmate. The ethereal map of the Middle East reappeared, but this time the southern region was a maelstrom of chaotic, fiery light. In stark contrast, the crimson line leading to Lebanon began to pulse with a steady, ominous, and intensely bright rhythm. It was the cold, calculated beat of a war drum. The vision pulled Daniel from his apartment and threw him into the command bunkers of Hezbollah, deep beneath the hills of southern Lebanon. He was surrounded by the proxy's commanders, their faces grim and determined, illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. But standing among them, unseen by the mortal men, was a towering shadow, a form of concentrated malice and pride. It was the Prince of Persia, his presence a palpable force, directing the flow of the coming battle. He was no longer just influencing, he was commanding. Daniel saw the prince's strategy unfold on their screens. It was a terrifying escalation. For months, while the Israeli army was heavily engaged in Gaza, the northern proxy would engage in a calculated, low-intensity conflict-firing anti-tank missiles at border posts, launching drones and trading artillery fire. Each strike was carefully calibrated, just below the threshold that would provoke an all-out war. This is the boiling the frog strategy, the angel's voice explained, its tone devoid of emotion, like a military briefing. It is designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. It bleeds Israeli resources, forcing them to fight a two-front war. It displaces hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens from the north, creating a massive internal crisis and straining the nation's morale. And most importantly, it normalizes a state of conflict on the northern border, desensitizing the world so that when the true storm breaks, it appears as just another escalation in an ongoing feud, not the premeditated assault that it is. Daniel watched in the vision as the months dragged on. He saw the weariness in the faces of Israeli soldiers, the fear and frustration of the displaced families. He saw the international community, led by nations under the prince's spiritual sway, calling not for the northern proxy to disarm, but for restraint on both sides, effectively paralyzing Israel and giving the enemy time to complete its final preparations. Then the moment of decision arrived. In the vision, Daniel saw the shadow figure of the Prince of Persia give a silent command. The time for calibrated strikes was over. The vision exploded into a nightmare of fire and fury. Daniel saw the sky over northern Israel turn black with rockets. This was not the sporadic fire of the previous months. This was the full, unrestrained unleashing of the entire arsenal. Tens of thousands of rockets, a storm of steel and fire, rained down not just on the border, but deep into the heart of the country. Haifa's port was ablaze. Tel Aviv's suburbs were struck. Power stations, airports, and critical infrastructure were targeted with devastating precision. The Iron Dome, a marvel of technology, was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the assault. It was a blitzkrieg designed to shatter the nation's will to fight in a matter of hours. But this was only the beginning. Simultaneous to the missile storm, Daniel witnessed the ground invasion. He saw thousands of fighters from Hezbollah's elite Radwan force, trained for years for this very moment, surge across the border. Their objective was not to hold territory, but to inflict maximum terror. They stormed into Israeli towns, their goal to kill, to capture hostages, and to plant their flag on Israeli soil, even if only for a day, to create a psychological victory of catastrophic proportions. The vision became a whirlwind of combat. He saw Israeli soldiers, caught off guard by the scale and ferocity of the attack, fighting desperate, heroic battles in the streets of their own towns. He saw civilian life grind to a halt as the entire country was forced into bomb shelters. The nation was paralyzed, its back against the wall, facing an existential threat on a scale not seen since its founding. And in that moment of supreme crisis, the vision showed him the final, terrible masterstroke of the Prince of Persia. As Israel reeled from the two-front war, its military stretched to the breaking point and its people terrorized, a new player would step from behind the curtain. The glowing map in Daniel's mind now showed the Prince of Persia's home territory, the nation of Iran itself. He saw its conventional military forces put on high alert. He saw its own long-range ballistic missiles being fueled, their targets pre-programmed for Tel Aviv, Dimona and Jerusalem. The regime, seeing Israel besieged and isolated, would feel the moment had come to step out of the shadows. The proxies had done their work. It was time for the master to deliver the coup de grace. This is his endgame. The angel's voice was a solemn toll. To use his proxies to create a crisis so severe that Israel is forced into a multi-front war, and then, under the guise of retaliating for an alleged Israeli strike or defending his allies, he will launch his own direct attack. He seeks to draw the entire region, and perhaps the world, into a conflagration. He desires an apocalypse of his own making, from which he believes his empire will emerge dominant and the people of the promise will be erased forever. Daniel stood on the precipice of this visionary Armageddon, his heart broken, his mind reeling. He saw the entire plan, from the initial deceptive massacre to the final, overwhelming assault. It was a perfect storm of violence, manipulation, and ancient hatred. He saw his people, the nation of Israel, surrounded, battered, and pushed to the very edge of annihilation. The trap was not just set, it was closing. The apocalyptic vision faded, leaving Daniel on the floor of his London apartment, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the cacophony of war still ringing in his ears. He was hollowed out, filled with a despair so profound it felt like a physical death. He saw the completeness of the enemy's plan, the flawless execution, the seemingly inevitable conclusion. The Prince of Persia had accounted for everything: political fallout, military response, global narratives. The board was set for checkmate. "It is a perfect plan," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking, not to the angel but to the suffocating darkness that the vision had left behind. "There is no way out. No military strategy can counter it. No political alliance can withstand it. We are finished." "His plan is perfect in the eyes of men," the angel's voice answered, and for the first time it was not the voice of a messenger or a military briefer, but a voice that thrummed with triumphant, unshakable power. The light in the room intensified, not with the gentle glow of before, but with the brilliant, fierce light of impending victory. But he has made one fatal miscalculation. He has accounted for the armies of nations, but he has not accounted for the army of heaven. He has analyzed the weapons of earth, but he knows nothing of the true weapon of the kingdom of God. The angel extended his hand, and the final vision began. It was not a map of the earth, but a glimpse into the realm of the Spirit, the command center of the King of Kings. Daniel saw legions of angels, ranks upon ranks of beings of fire and light, their faces set with holy resolve, awaiting a command. Their power dwarfed the fleeting authority of the Prince of Persia as the sun dwarfs a candle. And at their head, Daniel saw him, Michael, the great prince, the guardian of Israel. He was no longer just holding a line, he was preparing for a charge. He held a sword that seemed forged from a captured star, and his armor shone with the righteousness of God. He was not merely a defender, he was the enforcer of the divine promise, the ultimate guarantor of the covenant. "The Prince of Persia believes this war is his to direct," the angel declared, his voice booming like thunder. "But he is merely a rebellious actor in a story whose ending has already been written by the author of all things. His rage, his schemes, his meticulously planned chaos, all of it will ultimately serve the very purposes of the God he hates." The vision shifted for the last time. Daniel saw the moment of ultimate crisis on earth, the northern front ablaze, the direct threat from Iran imminent. He saw the leaders of Israel in a deep underground bunker, their faces pale, their options exhausted. He saw them reach a point beyond political calculation, beyond military strategy, a point of utter national desperation. And in that moment he saw them turn, not to their allies who had abandoned them, nor to their technology which was overwhelmed, but they turned upward. He heard a cry rise from the nation, a cry of repentance and desperation that had not been heard for generations. It was the cry of Jacob wrestling with the angel, the cry of Esther calling her people to fast, the cry of a people who had nowhere left to turn but to the God of their fathers. This is the ultimate weapon. The angel's voice resonated, filled with a love so powerful it healed the wounds in Daniel's soul. It is not a missile. It is not a bomb. It is the sound of a broken and contrite heart. It is the cry of humility. It is the prayer of desperation that unleashes the full might of the kingdom of heaven. The prince of Persia cannot fight it. His pride shatters against it. His schemes dissolve before it. It is the one variable for which he has no counter-strategy. As that national cry ascended, Daniel saw Michael and his legions move. It was a wave of light and power, so immense it tore through the spiritual darkness that the prince of Persia had woven over the region. He saw the dark prince, that ancient, prideful entity, recoil not from a physical weapon, but from the authority of the name of the Lord invoked by his people. The spiritual stronghold that had stood for millennia began to crumble. On earth, the effects were instantaneous and miraculous. Daniel saw confusion erupt in the enemy's command centers. He saw missiles malfunction on their launch pads. He saw proxy armies turn on each other in paranoia and fear. He saw a spirit of stupor fall upon the enemy commanders, their brilliant strategies dissolving into chaos. He saw a courage and wisdom beyond human explanation fill the leaders and soldiers of Israel. He saw deliverance that could not be explained by news anchors or military analysts, a victory so sudden and complete that the world would be left stunned with no rational explanation for the turn of events. The vision receded. Daniel was back in his apartment. The first rays of dawn were breaking over London. The 22nd day had begun. The angel stood before him, his message delivered. "The war is real, Daniel," the angel said, his voice now gentle. "The suffering will be real. The deception will be powerful. Do not despair at the darkness of the prince's plan, but stand in awe of the sovereignty of God's plan. Your role is not to be a passive observer. Your role is that of a watchman and an intercessor. You have seen the blueprint of the enemy. Now you must fight. Not with the weapons of your old life data, analysis, and reports, but with the weapons of the kingdom, prayer, fasting, and a declaration of the truth, no matter how the world tries to silence it. You must sound the alarm, not just of the coming war, but of the coming deliverance. You must tell those who will listen to look beyond the headlines, to discern the spiritual battle, and to take their stand. Your prayers, joined with the prayers of the faithful around the world, are the ammunition for Michael's host. They are the trigger for the final victory. With a final, brilliant flash of light that left an imprint of glory on Daniel's retinas, the angel was gone. The room was silent, but it was no longer the oppressive, static-filled silence of the enemy. It was a holy silence, pregnant with purpose. Daniel stood up, his body still weak, but his spirit soaring. He was no longer just Daniel the analyst. He was Daniel, a watchman for his time. He walked to his window and looked out at the awakening city, but he saw it with new eyes. He saw not just a metropolis of 7 million souls, but a battlefield. And he knew his war had just begun. The conspiracy of the Prince of Persia was vast, but the promise of God was greater. The prophecy of Daniel the prophet was not a forecast of doom, but a roadmap to a divinely orchestrated victory.